Okay. Hi, everybody. How are you? Welcome everybody to my special panel stream today. There's a side story that like about 30 minutes ago, we just lost like electricity. It's ongoing rainstorm, like really hot right now outside of my house. And we just lost electricity for about 20 minutes. And lucky that like 10 minutes before the live stream really started, we just our electricity back. So, this is one of my craziest stream ever. Today, I'm gonna introduce to you a great panel of indigenous people all over the world, and we're gonna talk about decolonization and landback, and we will try to answer all of your questions in good faith. If you still have any like misunderstanding or you don't understand anything about our movement and our understanding of landback and decolonization, and yep, I'm very excited to introduce Spook to the house. Hi.
Hey, aloha everybody. Aloha everybody. Let's see. Am I getting feedback from my own? Am I getting feedback from my own shoots?
I don't hear anything.
So I'm hearing myself coming back. I'm hearing myself coming back. Maybe I have a,
Okay.
Anyways, okay. While we figure that out, hey everybody, I'm Spook, defender of our sacred mountain, Mauna Kea. Defender of our sacred mountain, Mauna Kea. I hear on the illegally occupied Hawaii, on the sovereign country of Hawaii, Big Island, Big Island.
Wait a minute.
Activist, including on Mauna Kea itself.
Desktop. Look on OBS. Desktop.
What's that? What?
Okay. It's fixed now, right?
Oh.
Spook say top.
What desktop? What?
No, that's my desktop problem. That's not your fault. That's on my end. It's fixed now, I think.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, is it going now?
I think so. It's good now. Yes.
Should I reintroduce myself really quick?
Sorry. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. This technical, leftist stream, technical difficulties. Anyway, yeah, I'm glad that the electricity came back on for Luna in time. Anyways, so one more time, hi, I'm aloha, pea oi. My name is Chris. I'm also known as Silver Spook. I'm a native Hawaiian activist, defender of our sacred mountain, Mauna Kea, here on the Big Island of Hawaii under the ongoing illegal occupation by the United States Empire. I participate in a variety of actions, both here at on Mauna Kea, trying to do education on streams like this one, on my YouTube and Twitch channel, on Twitter, and also make anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist, decolonial cyberpunk adventure games in a lot of my free time during the day, like Neofeud, which I often discuss. Recently was just featured, great thanks to University of British Columbia's Social Justice Institute. So Neofeud was actually featured as a game there. I gave a guest lecture to a class there, so that was really cool, with my good friend Dr. Chris Patterson. Anyway, so I try to do as much education as I can on top of making games that are entertaining and fun, but I hope also educate people about what it means to be a native Hawaiian, to live by our Hawaiian values, what it means to how we can undo a lot of these intersecting kind of very problematic systems of capitalism, racism, colonialism, and how landback can play into that. And very happy to be here to discuss this with all of our indigenous relatives.
Yeah, thank you so much to have you here and to have your voice. I'm trying to bring voices like you, Spook, Chris, to the wider audience as many as possible, and I'm very happy to have you here in my stream. Okay, next let's introduce the YRN. I'm not sure how to call you. Hello.
Kia ora, my name is Yron. Or
Yron.
I just cut out the vowels in my name. I am Maori from Aotearoa, so kind of the South Pacific cousins of the Hawaiians.
Yep.
And I am an artist mostly. I think most recently was last year. I was a contributing artist for the game Umurangi Generation, the developer of which
Yep.
was on the last couple of streams ago. Yeah, and I have a lot of reckons about Landback and Decol. So good to see everyone here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to be here with us. And next, let's introduce the new Amauta. Welcome.
Hey, what's up,
Let's
y'all?
introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, my name is Amauta. I'm a Quechua Aymara immigrant in the United States. I'm an indigenous person from Bolivia. And just to introduce myself in Quechua, imanay kasangiche wagay panay kuna nyogaksuti Arnold and nyogaksuti new Amauta. And the whole point of and I'm speaking in Quechua because that's the language of my father. On my mother's side, we speak Aymara, which is one of the other major languages of the Andes, and both of these languages were predominant in what was known as Tawantinsuyo, or mislabeled the Inca Empire. But there's a long tradition of about 800 years of indigenous philosophy that has influenced modern discourse within Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador, which constitute the Andes. And but I don't want to center myself just on the Andes. I think it's important to have this transnational and in many ways hemispheric conversation about indigenous peoples in the Americas, especially when it comes to land back and questions of land reform, as we have all seen thrown around recently, since many of those inform what land back can be in the U.S., but also the faults and also the faults that happen there that can foretell a future for indigenous peoples in the United States. So I'm here to offer a hemispheric approach to land back from both South America, which is severely needed, in context with my siblings in the North, from many nations in the United States and Canada.
Yep. It's really awesome to talk to, I am also indigenous people in Vietnam. My people have been living in my area for 6,000 of years, so I'm very proud of our very rich, super rich culture. And the thing is that yes, Vietnam, we also were heavily colonized by French for more than hundreds of years, and then we imperialized by the USA, and also we got attacked by the fascist Japan too. So we all share a very sad and bloody history coming from the imperial core. And that is why first let's talk about decolonization. What do you think about the decolonization in the modern day like this? Let's start with maybe Spook.
Oh, okay. Just in case, I think Shaw, is anyone else trying to get into the stream, or that's it for now? Just one.
You ask.
Is there anyone else trying to get in? Yeah, I'm asking you, Luna. Sorry. Okay.
The link is totally open for if you still have any more comrades you want to join, that's fine.
Okay. I was just saying there was a couple more, but if they're not there yet, then that's fine. Anyways, I'm sorry. So the question is decolonization, right?
Yeah, in the modern day, yes.
Yeah. So so as a native Hawaiian,
Spook's just asking if there's anybody waiting.
Yeah, I'm just asking if there's anybody waiting, but if not, that's fine. So on decolonization for native Hawaiians, as I mentioned, kind of very briefly, we are currently undergoing in Hawaii. I mean, according to the United Nations itself, this is not just I'm just saying this. The sovereign country of Hawaii is under the United Nations High Commissioner on Human Rights, formally recognized as a strange form of occupation due to a illegal military occupation and fraudulent annexation in the 1890s, essentially. So that's not just the conjecture. That's literally the so-called international rules-based order, the United Nations formal recognition by the High Commissioner on Human Rights. So it's a Hawaii's situation is somewhat not necessarily unique in the world, but it's different in the ways in which Hawaii
Yeah.
became formally recognized as a sovereign nation among the family of nations. It's actually the third neutral country after Switzerland, I believe, was the first. Just a little bit of history. I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. But Hawaii in the 1800s, and here's a little link to this in case you want to like look at for yourself. And it's not just me talking about this. This is all factual. Also, there's a very important Hawaiian educator. His name is Adam Keawe, Keawe, who is a Hawaiian and Filipino historian who documents a lot of this. It is currently going through hundreds of thousands of documents and publications from Hawaii. And so important point to recognize is that Hawaii was in fact in the 1800s, in pre-contact with the Western world. Hawaii was already very advanced, and we had actually 80 to 100-year lifespans as documented by Captain Cook himself when he arrived here in Hawaii. However, even in the mid 1800s, Hawaii, as opposed to what Americans believe, most Westerners believe, which is that Hawaiians lived in huts. Prior to colonization, Hawaii was actually deindustrialized by the United States. Before 1898, Hawaii already had electricity, mass transit, railroads. Iolani Palace had electric lights before the White House. In fact, we had ferry, railroads, trolley system with, speaking of advanced mass transit, which is what we're all looking for, right, to get off from these kind of abusive, capitalist-centric car culture and what, very large indigenous Asian civilizations are currently succeeding at doing. Hawaii actually had very advanced mass transit railroads before America even illegally occupied us. Iolani Palace had electric lights before the White House. In that thread, there's images of trains, and these are the great successes that Hawaii had. There's a newspaper article where we are glad to inform our readers Hawaii also had massive print culture and were highest literacy rate in the world, which I'm going to get to shortly. Hawaii also had the highest literacy rate before the US and Europe, before colonization, banning of our culture and language, erasure of history and ghettoization of all of our people, including my people, I'm Hawaiian and Asian, and my ancestry is Hawaiian and Asian, but we didn't see race as a hierarchy of descending, increasingly degraded blood as people, including some very well-known leftists in the Western world, were also involved in the propagation of that idea. Hawaiians didn't see that. And Hawaiians in Hawaii had the highest literacy rate in this time, in the 1800s. We had books of law, newspapers, agricultural products, Bibles, textbooks, etc. These are things which would suggest to the Western so-called civilized world that you were civilized by having all these accomplishments. European visitors in the Paris Exposition were, for the most part, ruled by monarchs, and their highborn are exclusively the ones privy to excellent educations, whereas in Hawaii, this island nation, they had to admit, in Paris, the French, the British, American, etc., they all had to admit that this island Hawaiian nation is ahead in literacy, and the enlightened countries of Europe are behind it. Kalakaua, one of our leaders, it was called king, but it doesn't translate directly to that. We had to do that for reasons for prevention of invasion and destruction of our people and culture based on parity, right? It's what we're trying to do because we couldn't fight them militarily at this time. Kalakaua, one of our ali'i, had invented a subaquatic vehicle when Jules Verne was dreaming 20,000 leagues under the sea. There's actual photographic evidence of this, including a torpedo-proof vessel. It's called the fish ram. A lot of the submarines that are currently smashing into Chinese fishing farms, Hawaiians had them invented them before Westerners were deploying them to try to start World War III or whatever they're trying to do in the South China Sea. Anyways, the point is that we had technological advancement far in advance in many ways than many Western countries. Sovereign country of Hawaii had Black citizens before the U.S. Civil War. So in racial equality, the aloha kuleana pono, our values and the way we see things, the concept of being kanaka maoli, it's not tied to skin color. Conceptions of race, these Euro and settler colonial conceptions of race, you speaking the language and understanding the ways of the culture, you became a citizen if you were here to participate in mutual win-win cooperation, in mutual respect with us. You could speak Chinese, in fact, and Chinese were impact for full citizens in Hawaii as the U.S. chained them up to build railroads in the West Coast. The Underground Railroad didn't end in Canada. Canada abused Chinese and built their Vancouver and much of their railroads with abused Asian labor. Black people were segregated. Indigenous people continue to be genocided to this day with incontrovertible 7,000 child mass graves in the residential schools, which we are increasingly knowing. And Hawaii at this time in the 1800s, mid 1800s, already had, and there's a birth certificate, there's a citizenship certificate of somebody who was formerly a slave a black slave in America that was then free in Hawaii. So that was an important part of what I would argue is actual existing racial equality and socialism in Hawaii. Anyway, so I'll finish it up very quickly, which in fact inspired Sun Yat-sen. Sun Yat-sen's project for an anti-imperial, the first revolutionary of China, which both the PRC and the ROC, the current Chinese parties, they have disagreements, but what they acknowledge is the important anti-imperialist and based on a project of racial equality, of Chinese equality and equality of Chinese in the family of nations, not being imperialized, right? Under puppet imperial governments, it was, and socialism was premised and was, Sun Yat-sen modeled those ideas based on his life and existence in Hawaii. His other older brother, Sun Mei, in fact, lived on Maui with Hawaiian and Chinese working together for mutual cooperation. And basically, what's a worker co-op? It's a hui. And that was what inspired, in fact, one of the most successful, I would argue the most successful, one of these, if not right at the top of the most successful socialist projects on earth, was inspired, in fact, by Hawaii. So decolonization means, to me, it means, doesn't mean return to 1800s Hawaii, but it does mean recognition of all of these facts, which continue to go unrecognized in the Western world. It's not just Waikiki, and we're not just little natives dancing hula and throwing spears at, whatever racist trope you want to throw at the noble savage or savage version of us. It means recognizing that. It means the end of the United States respecting international law, and it means self-determination, and it means treating us with win-win mutual cooperation, which we're not getting from the illegal U.S. occupation. And anyway, that's it.
Yeah, it's it makes my blood boil whenever I think about how the U.S. been treating its colonies, and how white people still think that we are somehow lesser people. We are less civilized, even though fucking we've been having civilization thousands of years ago. And it's just disgusting. Okay, why Aryan? What do you think about decolonization in the modern day?
Well, for where I'm from, we have a somewhat similar story with Hawaii, in that it was the invasion. There was, right. So there's a few steps. So there was the contact in the 1700s, and then the settlement of people from Great Britain began towards the mid 1800s, and in the first kind of, I guess, wave of settlement, things were actually rather amicable, and we had okay relations with Great Britain here in Aotearoa. And yeah, it was successively over time, the port started filling with unruly sailors, whalers, and just other people who were looking to make business here. And it was really interestingly enough, it was all the business people running their own businesses that were causing a lot of issues here, like conflict between tribes and the settled population. This led to, in the 1840s, it led to the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, which was kind of a document that just sort of stated that Britain needs to make sure that its own behaving, because they were not doing that. And it seemed afterwards, after the treaty had been signed, it became immediately clear that they weren't respecting this treaty, and the settlement continued and actually expanded massively. And they also changed a lot of laws in this country, so that if we're not being cooperative with the Crown government, then we would have our land annexed as a fine payment. And so that's how a lot of our land was taken, was that we were resistant to settlement. The British government of the time ruled that to be illegal for us to be defending ourselves from forced settlement, and we lost a lot of land in the space of about 40 years. And so I think the task of decolonization, especially in the modern day here, is very important. We've managed to make some strides in the last 30, 40 years or so, such as Maori language. The Maori language, Te Reo Maori, is actually one of two official languages of this country, the other one actually being sign language. English is not an official language here, and yet it's still sort of socially enforced as the standard for settler reasons. But so yeah, for me, decolonization is just a very important thing here, because we a lot of our people, that we even though we're in cities, we're very far away from where we came from. We still know where we used to live. We still know where our families lived. We still know where we were forcibly removed. And I think decolonization would be great, because I would certainly love to go home, to be honest.
Absolutely, yes. I'm very happy to announce you that Sha is ready to join our conversation. Hello, Sha. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Okay.
Hello. Hi.
Hi. Hi. Can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, my name is Sha Marire Ongalung. I am a Micronesian, a Palauan, who was born and raised in the United States. I currently work as a media coordinator for the Indigenous Environmental Network, and I am in Washington, D.C. right now. We just wrapped up the People versus Fossil Fuels week of civil disobedience event.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. We are talking about, decolonization in the modern day, and what do you think about it? Now we will hear new Amauta. What do you have to say about decolonization?
Yeah, so decolonization for me exists in multiple steps and in multiple stages. It's not just this one grand monumental event of independence. I think we have to differentiate between independence and decolonization, because in the case of the Americas, independence from the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French empires weren't forms of decolonization. Decolonization, in essence, recognizes the indigenous people's right to sovereignty, right to self-governance, right to cultural promotion, as well as the communal economics that existed here prior to colonization. But we don't exist in the past. Indigenous peoples in the Americas that are certainly not trying to go back to the 1500s. And though many of us do look great in leather, that's not the point of decolonization. The purpose of decolonization is to exist within the 21st century on our own terms. And there are multiple forms of decolonization we could see now across the Americas. The new term that is being used across Latin America is Abya, which comes from the Kuna people of Panama. Kuna, either Kuna or Guna, depending on which, either the colonial or modern spelling. I'll be spelling out a lot of words just so people can search them up later. I don't want people to accidentally misspell and not find a search result. But decolonization in Bolivia, as one example, is seen as very advanced with the case of Evo Morales and the plurinational state of Bolivia. So what do I mean by plurinational state? Isn't Bolivia a republic? Many of the Latin American republics are starting to evolve into what are known as plurinational states. And plurinational states essentially recognize multiple nations under one state. The old model of the republic comes from the Treaty of Westphalen in the 1600s in Europe, in which different warring nations, in a way to accord peace, divided themselves amongst one ethnicity under one state, one nation, one state. In the case of Latin America, this model attempted to become constructed through the assimilation of indigenous peoples. There is a move, not a movement, but a sociological concept known as mestizaje, coming from the word mestizo, which means mixed blood in if you want to translate it to the North American context. And it's essentially that, but it doesn't mean that only in a biological sense. Many quote unquote mixed bloods or mestizos were in the modern age are usually indigenous peoples who have renounced their indigenous culture for a more westernized culture acceptable to the republics, anywhere from Mexico all the way to Argentina. Meaning that people to become part of the major ethnic group that all of Latin America represents, the mestizo, you had to give up all of your indigenous ways. In Mexico, I believe there are about 20, more than 20 indigenous nations. I could be completely wrong. In Peru, there are about 50 indigenous nations. In Bolivia, there are around 36. And in Chile, there are about 10. So within different parts of the America, and in the United States, there are, I believe, 500 recognized tribes, bands, and nations across the continental U.S., as well as the Hawaiians, Native Hawaiians, and Native Alaskan folks. So the plurinational state in Bolivia, to wrap this up, would be recognizes that within a new constitution, all of the indigenous peoples as having autonomy in relation to the nation, in relation to the state. No, for the people who always say nation state, the new term would become plurinational state because it's no longer a one-to-one relationship. And this type of autonomy allows for certain forms of self-determination, economic self-sustainability, as well as negotiation power with the nation state itself. I don't advocate for independence myself, for many indigenous American Indian nations, so to say. I think in the case of like Puerto Rico, Hawaii, there's a lot more of a case due to the geography of those being islands. But in the case of the Americas, many indigenous nations would be relegated to the worst lands, would be pushed off, would be given, and would be instantly encircled by hostile nations. So I think the road for autonomy allows for indigenous peoples to have negotiating power, as well as to be able to drive the politics of many of our nations. Because at the end of the day, all of the Americas is indigenous land. Whether there's an independent republic or you're within a republic that claims to be the new indigenous peoples when they're acting like colonizers. But I won't also disagree with people who want that type of independence as well. Those two are both decolonization, but they're different forms, and I think there can be a type of reciprocity, complementarity between the two that we need to recognize.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's really good. Talking about like, why am I hearing my own feedback? That's very annoying, I have to say, but okay. So Vietnam, like, talking a little about the rural national kind of state is very interesting. It's not exactly the same as Vietnam, of course, but in Vietnam, believe it or not, we have 54 different ethnic minorities in Vietnam with 54 languages and 54 like different like cultures. And the thing is that like the 54 ethnic minorities in Vietnam right now, we are living together in harmony, and then like the government trying to like protect the culture and the languages of the people. So like generally speaking, they have absolutely right to maintain their culture and their languages. They have land. They even got given the land, farmland from the local government when they were born. And also like, yeah, we're trying our best to protect their culture and languages, and also we give them like privilege. Because I'm King people, so I'm the majority of Vietnamese people, and I don't have a lot of privilege. We call it like in a funny way, not like real privilege, but like we give them priority Like if an ethnic minority go to a university or something like, or trying to want to work for the local government, they will be given the priority to take that chance higher than me. So, and I'm totally fine with it. I'm actually fine with it, and I think that is very important. I really like the idea of plural national state, and I hope that you and like maybe in Bolivia, you can like the first country to do that successfully. Solidarity and good luck. About Sha, I want to hear what do you have to say about decolonization, especially in the modern day and especially in the imperial core.
So going back to talking about the difference between like independence and decolonization, one of the things that we're seeing a lot, not just in the Pacific, but kind of everywhere, is that yes, there is an importance when it comes to decolonizing, especially when your aim is land back. But if you're not indigenizing, in addition to that, when you get that sovereignty, when you have your independence back, if you haven't done like the decolonization and indigenizing work, you can remove all the horrible things and still have the same problem because of how deep rooted the colonization becomes. Where, and it's the thing that I always end up talking about, like compensatory domination, where it's one minority group oppressing another, oppressing another, oppressing another. It becomes so permeated in our cultures and in our norms that all the decolonization work still doesn't fully get things done for us, because then you have dynastic families, you have the wealthy families, you have people who are traditional leaders who now use that traditional leadership to say that we should be in charge of everything else because of heredity. And rather than going back to indigenous protocols and using our cultural norms and protocols and traditions to like get back into leadership, they're using things that they've learned. Basically, they don't know any other way to govern. And so there is the decolonization, but decolonization and indigenization have to kind of go hand in hand, at least in the things that we've been seeing. I get in trouble with the people, especially leadership in the Republic of Palau, a lot, because I'm constantly screaming, this is a plutocracy and it's an oligarchy, because there's maybe half a dozen families that are in leadership positions, and then they marry into each other's families, and then they stay in leadership positions. And a lot of it has to do with their families with money, their families with prestige. It's not necessarily because they're good leaders. Half of them are shitty leaders, horrible leaders who have no business being elected in, but they have big families and they have a lot of money. And it's because, yes, we got our independence, but we decolonized and didn't indigenize. We were like, okay, we did all the steps we needed to do to have these things, but we didn't look at what, in terms of the governance, was initially ours and what was forced onto us, and we now think is just a part of our culture, a part of our society. And I'm seeing it over and over again, not just in our islands, but in other islands, in other countries. And yeah, I get in a lot of fights over that more than anything else as of lately.
Yes, it is. It like like you fight and then you decolonize yourself. You gain your like self-determination and independence, but it's actually the easy part. The harder part is how you run a society after that. So like okay, like Vietnam is a country that we did decolonize ourselves about 70, 80 years ago. We did it, and yes, we had a successful like generation of Vietnamese people been like we died to fight for our independence and freedom, including my own grandpa. He died in 1968 in the south of Vietnam in the Tet Offensive. So, but the thing is, after we won the war, we successfully decolonized ourselves and had the land reforms. Even until now, Vietnam is still facing lots of problems, mostly coming from the imperial core, because they still constantly using their soft power to the state to try to sabotage and try to weaken us once again. And this is a kind of topic that I want to talk maybe later in the live stream. For now, I want to welcome the last Sioux.
Hello,
There you go.
everyone.
How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. I'm sorry I'm late. I just woke up. My apologies to everyone.
It's totally fine. Can you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sioux. I'm from the Hunks Dakota Oyate Nation up here in so-called now called Canada. Um, I stream on Twitch and I talk about all different things Indigenous. I don't necessarily focus completely on my people's way of life. I try to incorporate and show and share other different tribes around the world way of life so that people have an understanding of what traditional Indigenous way of life looks like and what it is. And promote very much healing, education, truth and reconciliation, and restorative justice rather than what we see constantly today as a punitive justice and colonial justice, which just means just them, not us. Justice for us usually means a jail cell that we sit in for way too long. And that's not our people's way of life. As far as I know, from everyone that I've talked to, no matter whether we're in New Zealand, Australia, the Pacific Islands, Hawaii, North, South, Central, what we call Turtle Island, settlers have called America. We didn't really have, as far as I can understand from what I'm told, we didn't have penalized justice system. We had more of a healing system, worked on making sure that the community all got together and that what was good for the community worked for the community and that there was healing and restorative justice for everyone. And I find with our sister who was just here, I don't know, she must have had to dip out. I find our greatest problem today is that our traditional elders are dying off in mass numbers, and our traditional people are getting smaller, and we're trying to rectify that and correct that. Like our relative here, Silver Sioux, says, most of us are half stormtrooper.
Yep.
We're unfortunately stuck with colonizer mindset because that's what's been forced through us through indoctrination into colonization through residential schools, boarding schools, the theft of our children to be raised in colonizer worlds, and thinking. It's a hard fight and a hard battle. And unfortunately, we're always stuck with all these stories from capitalists that have no basis in truth and falsehood, but people believe them way too often. Like we're the primitive, unintelligent savages when we're not. We're anything but that. And no matter how much evidence we bring forward, even some of our own people perpetrate the same uneducated mindset of like, yeah, we were savages and all this stuff. And it's really hard because we've been indoctrinated for so long into thinking that white is right, that us people of color just don't seem to understand that no, that's not the case. That we have a long history of really beautiful culture and heritage and a way of life. And as well, we say it all the time, right? Marx, Engels, Kropotkin, Bakunin all got their whole entire concept for communism, anarchism, and socialism from us indigenous people.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is, well, speaking from, I don't know, Vietnam maybe has a little bit of experience of decolonization ourselves. As you know that like we've been colonized for over 100 years by the French, and the fact is that generations of French people did go to Vietnam, and they had families in Vietnam for over hundreds of years. So like and when Vietnam we won the fight against colonization from the French, we at that time we even like invited them to join our force. Because like if you care about our people, if you want to fight with us, we invited them. But the sad thing is none of them joined. All of them just like ran away back to their like motherland panically, something like that. And the thing is that like the people like now, even like especially, I have to say like the next generation of settlers, they talking about us. They're talking about us without understand anything about us, and that is very insulting, and it is very, very sad. And still, even though they claim themselves to be leftists, they claim they care about us, but their talking point sounds exactly like the white supremacist talking point. They think that we're gonna do like something like white genocide or like reverse genocide. Like what the actual fuck? You know, when those people, when they talk about those things, they never want to listen to our voices. Like, you know, like the last panel, I don't want to name any names here, but like the whole panel talking about decolonization and landback, but all white people there. Like, what the fuck? Like, nobody's stopping you from talking about landback or decolonization. That's fine. You have the right to talk about it. But like, if you want to have a public discussion about it, don't you think that maybe you should invite at least one or two of us? So you can have at least some like different like perspective on it. That is the white supremacism mindset. That's still like got like, ingrained deeply inside the mindset of those supposed to be leftists, supposed to be on our side, and it's sad. It's sad, you know.
We have a
I don't
saying
know.
around my community. Land back doesn't mean we want your toothbrushes, because we don't.
Exactly. I don't even know, like, is that obvious that we're not gonna steal your freaking toothpaste and toothbrushes? Like, please. And the thing is, like, I just saw somebody in the chat that said that, like there are still white people in Vietnam right now, you know, like it means that like the decolonization didn't work, blah blah blah. Like you still lost to the white people. Like you don't know nothing about Vietnam at all. So you can say that thing like so proudly, like that, ignorantly, like that. Yes, there are still white people in Vietnam, but the thing is that like we invite you here, and we have our self-determination, we have our freedom and independence. And if you did something fucked up to us, we're gonna kick you out whenever we want. All right? Of course, like it means that like it doesn't, when white people in Vietnam here doesn't mean like they colonize us or they like exploit us or something like that. We own this land. We are the people of this land, and you're welcome as long as you respect our people, our culture. All right, and don't come here just to like, you know, it is a fact that lots and lots of white people came to Vietnam for like child abuse or like sexual harassment or something like that, pedophile. And lots of them like sent to jail for life sentence for that. That is like, we does land back doesn't mean that we want ethno state.
Yeah, when
I want to yeah, I want to hear you talk about this more. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I know who you are. Like I was involved in that debate when that was bubbling up very very ferocious. And my problem isn't that white people are talking about land back. I prefer when white people actually support land back, but also do talk about it in nuanced ways. My problem with the discussions that I disagreed with were mainly because I disagreed with the way they misunderstood land back. It wasn't that, oh, you're white, you can't talk about this. I actually don't agree with that, and I disagree with folks who do say that, because then it makes it seem like
Absolutely.
it makes it seem like we're incapable of actually discussing these nuanced
Exactly.
ideas because it is our own turf. But I think the level of nuance that was had was awful. It seemed like pseudo intellectualism, and close shots, but they were close, but they didn't reach the mark, and it made it so that it seemed like Landback was an NGO project when Landback has a historical trajectory and a historical tradition of self-determination, land reform, decolonization, indigenous sovereignty, tribal rights, on hashtag honor the treaties, all of these different indigenous movements that have very similar, if not the same, politics of recovering indigenous land, and land back is just the next iteration of that. It's the one that's most popular. So I don't want people. I think it's important to show why there are people who misuse land back even on the native side for neoliberalism and for corporate gain, as well as creating a type of unity or coalition with certain groups that we don't that are actually against native sovereignty. But I think it's also important to understand that that is one segment of land back. The same way that there are multiple segments of land reform that existed, some that were sponsored by JFK in the Alliance for Progress or La Alianza para el Progreso, which was JFK trying to prevent CIA coups from occurring. To prevent um, in, Cuban-style Marxist revolutions across Latin America in the '60s by creating massive amounts of modernization and land reform, so that Latin American countries don't just immediately side with Cuba, but have a middle ground that is easier to manage. And I think when people kept throwing out land reform, I made a post saying there's a problem with just saying land reform. Which ones? What traditions? And there was also another point. I'm not against land reform the same way I'm not against land back, because there are traditions that we need to follow and show a proper future for the Americas. I just don't but I also wanted to show the bad examples to say, hey, the same way you only think of one definition of land back, I can show you a really bad definition of land reform that is completely against your politics. Now, what are you going to do when you're faced with that evidence and when the majority of land reforms in the Americas? And I think it's important to think about the Americas specifically, since land back is a specifically indigenous American project. That the majority of land reforms were anti-communist. What are you going to do with that evidence? Oh, we can just say the Soviet Union had a better land reform. Vietnam had a better land reform. Cuba had a better land reform, and I agree. Or I would say that those were more progressive and had more communist tendencies. But they can differentiate between different land reforms, communist ones and anti-communist ones. But they can't do that for land back, and it's the simplest request. And many of the folks that I've seen being so adamant about saying, no, you can't ever use land back. It's all just an NGO project, and you're just being a patsy or a fool for Jeff Bezos. It makes incoherent sense, and it alienates them from the very folks that they're trying to win over. And that's just bad praxis. That, in essence, that's just bad dialectics. You're not even being dialectical at this point.
Exactly. That's chauvinism, they already have their own like conclusion inside their mind, and they just cherry pick all the evidence to support that already existed conclusion, and that is very annoying.
And there's no shame in saying, hey, we were wrong. We disagree with NGOs leading land back. I agree with that. I don't think NGOs should be the leaders of land back. There's no shame in that. What was it? The word Amauta means philosopher or teacher. And I want to be an educator when it comes to these native issues, because even on the native side, I didn't see enough nuance that I would have wanted, which is why I entered into to this debate. But I think for folks with such a large platform, there is no shame in saying, hey, we got certain things wrong. Let's just backtrack and say, yeah, there are different versions of land reform. We don't agree with the NGO ones, but we will support, at the very least critically, the ones that indigenous peoples are running. It's not a difficult request, and it's a pragmatic one at best. And if there's something the left lacks, it's pragmatism, and they showed it in strides.
I want to also point out, like, we also, like, if we look at like the Zapatistas,
Yes.
we can clearly see landback going on and decolonization, and that we run into trouble or difficulties, and then we have to reevaluate and try to find something that actually works. And whether it's we need to add in some extras or find something completely different, it's that humility that we have to be honest with ourselves and everyone else, and be able to take a look and go, okay, this didn't work. What can we do to make this or something similar that will work? And it's all a process. It's not going to be a utopia state like right from the get-go. That's not going to be what's happening. I know everybody would love to think that we can have a utopia state right off the hop, but that's not it. It's a process, and it takes time. No one, you're taking generations who have been removed from our traditional ways of life for, like, some of us for like 500 plus years. So it takes time, right? It's not an overnight process. And we're going to make mistakes. And we're going to have to be, like I said, right? Like, using Zapatistas as an example of being able to be honest with each other and being real and going, okay, this didn't work. What can we do to either make it work, or something that we might have to reframe or completely come up with a different idea that will work? And that's basic human principle. As a human being, you make mistakes throughout your whole entire life. You either learn from them or you continuously make them. But hopefully, when you're honest with yourself, you make them, you learn from them, you grow from them, you heal from them to become better.
Yes. I think if Yarn, if you want to talk.
Yeah, I guess with this conversation of talking about people who are very unfairly opposed to landback, the point that I see a lot of them tend to bring up is about they use the phrase indigenous bourgeoisie, which, to be honest, is actually a real concern of mine as well.
Thing.
Yeah, like even though the way that they're representing it is in bad faith, there is actually concern to have about that. Like, for example, here, there are tribes here which they have unfortunately organized themselves in a somewhat corporate structure. And in the process of decolonization, I want to do away with that entirely. Decolonization also means getting rid of the colonial systems that our people operate under. And like, as well, it's just a lot of them will say, what if this indigenous bourgeoisie gets a pocket of land? It kind of, I guess, pictures land back as if every indigenous person will get mailed a deed to a piece of land and a check in the mail, and they're just like, oh yeah, I've got a deed, I've got a check, I can do whatever. The whole process of decolonization and land back is also about changing the relations that everyone has to the land itself. Yes, there are indigenous bourgeoisie that exists, but in a necessarily socialist decolonization, they won't have the ability to utilize the land that their people are stewards of, because again, it's not a relation of ownership; it's a relation of stewardship, and it's a collective one as well. Being able to be bourgeoisie will then necessarily become like highly improbable, if not impossible, to achieve without like taking advantage of a lot of people, which by then you're probably going to be up against the wall. So, so yeah, so I guess that's like addressing another point that I see a lot about, what if the indigenous bourgeoisie get their hands on land, and that's just, well, they won't get their hands on land in the same way that they did before. They'll exist there, but their relation will not be one of ownership or of being the master of piece of land. Yeah. I guess as well, I kind of wanted to bring up, there was a bit of a mention there about how a lot of our own still have a tendency to fall into these colonial things. And like an example of that is how there are quite a few countries in the Pacific that have their independence, but they are controlled very heavily by the church. Tonga is an example. I'd even say here is an example, because a lot of Maori tend to be Christian, and quite a few of them Mormon even, which is completely bonkers to me, but somehow they figured out how to make that work. Yeah, I kind of don't know where to go.
I just lost my audio.
Oh, you lost your audio?
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yes, I'm good now. I have a super chat about 30 minutes ago. I'm so sorry. This is Victor. And the message is, what a pleasant surprise to come across. Oh, thank you so much for your donation.
Oh, what a
The thing is
sweetheart.
that, like, somebody asked in the somebody in the chat asked, like, well, like, what did Vietnamese do without 54 ethnic minorities, right? It's simple, because like we don't have the same mindset with white people. So like, if like most of I personally talk to a lot of ethnic minorities, people living in like the mountain area of Vietnam, and most of them, they are still occupying the land that they've been born with it. Like we never kick them out. We never came there. King people never came there, like kick them out and then genocide them. It's just like we just like, okay, you still live here and you still have your village and your house here, and the government will also give you a 500 square meter of rice field for each of you when you were born, and just live here. And now you're living just under like a communist party of Vietnam, and that's just it. It's just like like we don't do the same thing. Maybe one bad thing that Vietnam did, I have to say, like about 500 years ago, when we, like we had a fight with the Cham kingdom in the south of Vietnam. And it was like, well, it happened like 500 years ago, and it was under feudalism. And if you want to talk more about this, or you want me to know more about this, you can go to my Mooncast. It's on Tuesday night, about 10 or 11 p.m. I can give you a full like history lecture about that. But generally speaking, ethnic minorities in Vietnam living in pretty harmony with each other. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, just if I could, I'm not sure where you want to go next, but I had something to say, unless you have something else you want to jump to.
Do it.
Oh yeah. Anyway, so just like I kind of on Sue's topic, and actually before I do that, I want to say Shaw, unfortunately, due to actually doing Landback, or I mean actually doing decolonial work in Washington D.C.'s capital with the Indigenous Environment Network, Shaw is if you've ever seen Reservation Dogs, Shaw's boss is Dallas Goldtooth, who is one of the lead actors on Taika Waititi produced. Speaking of Aotearoa and our Indigenous relatives there, Shaw works with Dallas Goldtooth is not only the lead actor of Reservation Dogs, but is also the media coordinator for Indigenous Environment Network, and a group of other huge actions taking place at the Capitol in front of Biden's little war criminal house down there. And there's a lot of action happening there. Shaw has actually been standing off with the police a lot recently, and with all of the mass protests demanding everything we're kind of talking about right now. So I think Holly dropped links to that earlier. So, but unfortunately, Shaw looks like might not be with us for reasons. Let's just say for reasons of actual activism. Let's put it that way, like on the ground. So, but thanks so much for Shaw for showing up, because I tried to reach out to as many people as we could. So thank you. So everybody who showed up. Anyway, so what I wanted to say is that, speaking of, like Nasu brought up, I'm a science fiction nerd. You know, there's a lot of indigenous nerds like me and Taika. You know, we're all like, I'm waiting for my Akira cyberpunk indigenous directed cyberpunk thing. I don't know if that's gonna happen, but until then I'll settle for Reservation Dogs. But I talk a lot in science fictional metaphors, including Star Wars. So when I do often say I'm half stormtrooper, I'll open with that. Like there is to me, like the word indigenous, you know, what does this even mean, right? The word indigenous only has meaning in the face of colonization, right? As Thomas Brown
Exactly.
used in 1646, those people in what we call Turtle Island, but was referred to as America, standing from a gunboat, right? After pillaging who knows what Asian country with opium for silk, tea, and rubber, take your pick. He stood and looked out at North America and said, this land is filled with N-words. And he used another word, not that word. I don't want to say it. And these are not indigenous to this land, right? The word indigenous means that place where the colonizers, disproportionately European because of unhealed trauma from the Star-Spangled version. Sorry, the Roman version of what is now Star-Spangled Rome. The unhealed trauma of the Roman invasion. That's a big part of it. That's not all of it, but because the word indigenous only has meaning if there are people that are committing mass violence, that are stealing people and stealing land and putting the stolen people on the stolen land, destroying languages, destroying cultures, not living in mutual win-win cooperation. What we call Shakang Shahui is a word that the collective moderate prosperity for all, which comes from, I love bringing this up. Hui is a Hawaiian, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Maori word that ties all of our cultures together from the Asian Pacific across thousands of years and thousands of miles. Doesn't say that we're perfect people. It doesn't say that we have no colonial violence in us ever. That's not true. We have to deal with and heal from our own internal stormtroopering, even if it's 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, but we have to acknowledge it. We have to, in Hawaii, we call it ho'oponopono. We have to make it right and don't allow the mass violence and then ultimately mass disinformation. That's why everybody thinks that Hawaiians are backwards, and all the people that are in Central South America that aren't looking a certain way, as the Añez administration was propagating in Bolivia, which I was following very closely at the time, was basically saying you should all go back into the jungle and you're satanic, et cetera, disgusting, racist things. Because with mass violence and mass exploitation and mass plunder and mass theft of land and people and culture comes mass lying. Otherwise, you'd have to like heal from hundreds and centuries of this damage that you have not undone, you know, in these imperial eras. And so the word indigenous, when Mr. Brown, the general in the Union Jacked descendant of the Holy Roman Empire, stared at Africa, he would say, if he shanghaied, right, a roofied opium war Chinese coolie and brought him to Africa, he would say, this Chinese Shanghai coolie is not indigenous to this African continent.
Oh my God! So word coolie is also a Vietnamese word. We took it from the original word, and the word coolie in Vietnam means just slave. It's like the workers, but receiving like bare minimum wage to live, and it is a Vietnamese word now. The word coolie, oh my God, it brought a lot of memories back to me.
I'm sorry if it's bringing too much re-triggered trauma, but
it's fine. It's fine.
But you know, I mean, as my not my friend, but you know, I watch a lot of Vijay Prashad and No Cold War, and India, of course, were described horrifically. All these words, by the way, I'm using these words because these are the words that they use. I'm trying not to use them as much as possible, but this is the reality. And so, you know, my point is that like the peoples of, you know, that's why I think I want to say I was somebody who was calling Luna indigenous a lot of the time, and I said, you know, you're an indigenous person of Vietnam. I don't want to take credit for that, but that's the way that I view it, because none of us, the Hawaiian, Native Hawaiians, we don't have no violence in our culture. We don't have no transgressions. We have those. As Shah was saying, internally, there are stormtroopers in my family that literally are on Navy ships programming facial recognition systems on drones to blow up innocent journalists and civilians in Afghanistan as we speak. It makes me feel sick. Think about how many $300,000 a year NSA developers living with the mole people that Edward Snowden was releasing the Death Star's laundry with, who are in my family, who are G13 like high level executives in the Earth's actual Star Destroyer coming out of Hawaii. It makes me very sad. It makes me very sad, like we've already kind of said, that is, and so that all has to be decolonized. That internal work, as Lasu was kind of talking about, I myself was not able to. I cannot say everything I want to say in Hawaiian because my language was banned. My father denies the genocide of Native Hawaiians to my face. He's more Hawaiian and Pacific Islander and Asian. He still denies Hawaiian genocide to my face. He says, Chris, we're all white capitalists now. And Canada did not commit any genocide in residential schools. He said it's all tuberculosis. He tells it to my face, and it makes me cry. I cannot speak my language fluently. That has been stolen from me. I was trained to be a Goldman Sachs high-frequency trading algorithm programmer and making a lot of money on Wall Street, taking the rest of what remains of your healthcare, housing, and your municipal, repackaging all of your Floridian mortgages into collateralized debt obligations and blowing up global economies and, I don't know, impoverishing Bolivia. That's what I was supposed to do. I went to a very expensive private school right across from Obama's war criminal training facility, Emperor Palpatine training facility. And that is damage to me personally. That's the way I viewed it. That is continued internal damage in my own head that I have to try to my best to undo by reclaiming the stolen Hawaiian culture from myself in the ghetto of Kalihi that I was born in, where we Hawaiians are speaking of the school to prison pipeline, Hawaii has the highest rate of mass incarceration by police being called by the schools to round up Black and Indigenous people of color, disproportionately Native Hawaiian, to go to mechanically separate chicken for Tyson for 25 cents an hour in a prison in Arizona. So that was what part of my healing process was, to try to teach and educate and keep kids trying to do social services, try to do educational work to try to stop that from happening in my own community. Now I am incapable without systemic change of healing, saving all these kids. I'm not Superman, and that's the problem with billionaire philanthropist arms dealer Playboy Stan movies, like all Marvel movies and everything that comes out of Hollywood. But we have to work together to solve these problems. And I'm going on for a long time, but my point is that, like, we all have this internalized trauma, and the question is not like when I see people doing that, just going, oh yeah, I happen to be Hawaiian and I got a degree from this and this and that, and so I'm gonna, put the blessing on this multi-billion-dollar project on. And I know this happens. William Isla was a native, somebody of Hawaiian descent, who was tearing down. I was on Mauna Kea trying to defend this illegal occupation and illegal desecration of our sacred mountain with the biggest military and police occupation. And it was a native Hawaiian who was being paid a lot of money to justify this ongoing action. And to me, that is saddening, because that's more of the seeds of colonialism that are sown in every person that is colonized, and that trauma that goes unhealed. My father and my father's father, my father's father's father failed to heal from the military occupation of the United States and the destruction of what I was talking about earlier. And so our duty is to collectively heal from it and to unify behind. A lot of it is the principled. They're pre the word socialism, anarchism, these things, anti-imperialism, Lenin. These people were all twinkles in their parents' eyes, right? Before when these concepts were being used, aloha, kuleana, pono, we have to use that and also recognize that those parts of ourselves that are damaged, and recognize even in our ongoing praxis, like here at the Silver Spook Cooperative, the Hui. That's why I talk about me, Holly, and everyone else. We have no bosses and no landlords. We're trying our best to live as Sun Yat-sen's and other Hawaiians Hui in the 1800s, when they were boycotting white capitalist plantations and banks, dole, and the sugar plantations, and even before that. And we're trying our best, but we know that we will make mistakes. We will miscommunicate. I'm streaming from we got to use platforms that are run by billionaires, and that sucks. But we have to do our best. And anyway, I'll stop talking. Yeah. We got to do our best.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Thank
saying.
you so much. Wait a minute. This is important news. We just got a huge raid. I really want to know who raided us. And there are about 250 people watching right now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this panel.
I think it was Left Flank Vets. Shout out to Left Flank Vets.
Oh, shout out. Yes. I follow them on Twitter, and they are awesome.
If I can make a quick comment for the vets out there. And one thing that's interesting about land reform is that many military leaders actually led land reform. Progressive and left nationals, anti-imperialist military leaders in Latin America led land reforms and fought for indigenous sovereignty, and actually fought in many cases for socialist type policies. leaders like General Juan Velasco Alvarado in Peru, General Guillermo Lara in Ecuador, General Juan Jose Torres in Bolivia, and even General Lázaro Cárdenas in Mexico, who actually led the Mexican land reform in his presidency from like 1934 to 1940. So for the vets out there feeling alienated by the left, oh, the military is imperialist and is colonialist. Yes, and structurally it is, but if we can actually show that there is a military history that has fought for decolonization, that has fought for anti-imperialism, that has fought for socialistic policies, those can be those can be very important examples for how veterans and even folks who have inclinations for the military but also have progressive values can be part of many of these discussions and can be very not only supportive but can actually be leaders in trying to break the hold of the military industrial complex.
Yes.
So I want to shout out the vets out here who are on the left, because y'all have an important mission just the same as the rest of us. And for the native vets out there, you have an indigenous history that has fought for land back and land reform across the Americas, and you can do it too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we
If
have
I
a really, yeah.
if I may, just two things. One, um, I want to also give my honor and respects and love to the veterans, because when No DAPL was going on, veterans came in support of us and literally were there to be the front line, to help make sure that Indigenous people were not end up being murdered. Um, and many of veterans from the United States Army or military showed up to help, to be there, to lend support. Um, the Sioux Nation of my people owe you all a great big thanks, because you suited up, you showed up. You just didn't sit there and watch from TV screen and go, well, you know. Um, this also goes back to some treaties that I always allure to her. In the original treaties here in North America, it was one of mutual protection and mutual friendship. And many people don't either it wasn't spoken much about or thrown away to the wayside, but us Indigenous people have always remembered that, the original treaties before they were violated and broken and changed before they hit Congress. That's the one point. The other point I wanted to point out was that, like, prime example for myself, I was stolen at like 3 months old, as just a little baby, from my family, placed in what's now called the 60 scoop, where they sold me to a non-Indigenous home to kill the Indian and save the child. It took me 26 plus years now. I have been learning my culture, my heritage, my people's way of life. And I still can't speak fully my language. I wish I could fluently speak my language. And it gets hard from time for me, because as much as I've spent 20 plus 6 years learning my culture, learning my spiritual way of life of my people, the Sioux Nation, you know, and also learning about other people's way of life, because we are taught, don't be shy to learn other people's way of life, because you learn to cherish yours even the more so. And you have a better understanding when you're talking about things, because you're learning other people's culture too. So you grow more wisdom and more knowledge. And we work hard on these things. And we still have people in our own, like, that forget that they're indigenous, and they showboat colonization thinking and way of being rather than our own way, which is really kind of messed up, but it is what it is. And this is what colonization has done to many of us. It's not, it's not, we hear it all the time, and in this panel too, we're talking about it. The fact that we still have a lot of work to do to healing our people and our nations. And at the same time, we're running out of time. Like 100% of the Sioux Nation before colonization spoke our language, knew our culture, knew our traditions, knew our ceremonies, knew our way of life. Now it's been reduced down to 5 to 15%. And now we're keep trying to work on renewing that and learning and sharing that with the younger generation and trying to teach the younger generation so that our younger generation will know who they are. They won't be blindsided by this. Oh, you're not a native. You don't meet blood quantum. That's not our way of life. That's colonization's way to eliminate us on paper. And it's really screwed up. And I hope that eventually we can work on rectifying that and fixing that. Like we have here pro-government natives and we have traditional natives. And the pro-government natives are all about white supremacy and allowing colonization to exist and partaking fully in that. And then we have our traditional natives who aren't about that at all. And there's a huge battle that rages between our own people in that aspect. And it's really saddening. Like,
Yeah.
There's so much work that we have to do to heal from these things. It's not even funny. Like, there's a saying, right? Colonization stole more than you know. And it's true.
Yes, it's still your history. It's
Mhm.
it's still your history. It's still your culture. It's still your language.
And then if you can't speak fluently your language, they laugh at you and go, oh, you're not, I guess you're not indigenous anymore because you can't fluently speak your language. And it's like, well, no, you made it so that we can't fluently speak our language. Your actions of colonization and trying to eliminate us and eradicate us off the planet caused us to have that gap in language so that we don't understand or aren't able to fully speak our language. And that it dwindled the amount of people who can fluently speak down the language to, like I said, 5 to 15% of the population. And then we're automatically told, oh, well, the whole terror, or no, how do they put it? Prima nocta, where they literally went out of their way to impregnate indigenous women to breed us out. So that they figured that once they got us to a certain blood quantum level, they can just remove us as existence as indigenous people. There's only 3 things on the planet right now and ever in history that have ever gone by a blood quantum: dogs, horses, and indigenous people. Like, that's fucked up. No other race on this planet goes through blood quantum. No other race on this planet goes through it at all. You're Scottish, you're Irish, you're German, you're Ukrainian, you're Dutch, you're English, you're Scandinavian. No one's making you do a blood quantum to prove that you are those. but they'd make us do blood quantums like animals, like we're not human beings. And in truth, once colonization went and grabbed the foothold over here, we literally didn't become human. We were stripped of our humanity. And I can say, pretty sure, feel the same, that it's pretty much the same thing when we look at our Australian and New Zealand relatives, that we were stripped of our humanity, of being human beings, because of some doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, and terra nullius. And this is where we live. This is what we still deal with today.
It's happened. That same process has happened across Latin America too, where the church and government officials who have implemented education programs have tried to strip indigenous peoples of our languages. Languages like Quechua, Aymara, Mapuche, Pijao, what was it, Ashaninka, Aguaruna, Guarani, like the whole cavalcade, and Wayu in Colombia and Venezuela, like the whole cavalcade of indigenous languages in South America, Central America, North America. And there was that type of unity. There weren't boarding schools, so to say, but there were many churches that created what are called created small types of similar styles to reservations called resguardos, where the church essentially ran the structure. The church priests essentially ran the structure of society. They were in some ways the landlord, and the indigenous peoples worked for the priest. And in many cases, the point was to evangelize and to assimilate indigenous peoples to Christianity. So, or even in like after the Republic, one thing that's very interesting is that many people think Latinos can't colonize. I mean, if you look at Latin America, many there are different. What we know as Latino, that cat or Latinx, Latina, what you see is that indigenous peoples were not considered within what is now Latinx in Latin America. We were considered indigenous, and we were considered either outside the scope of the nation state or as enemies to it, because we always claimed back our land, or were always quote unquote impediments to progress. Similar arguments that were being made during the land back discourse. Oh, you want degrowth, you want to destroy what was it, industrialism, which is untrue. What indigenous peoples want is to make to industrialize, or to use modern technology on our own terms. In many cases, for a philosophy of reciprocity and harmony with nature, not domination over it. But that doesn't also mean the noble savage. Oh, let's go back to grass skirts and trading fruit for as currency, which we never did either way. The whole point, though, there's a little discussion happening in the YouTube chat, and I just want to shut that down real quickly because it also goes into a very important point. Many Marxists believe that fighting for land back and fighting for native self-determination are either race essentialism, a call for race war, or a type of antithetical to Marxism, that it's against the bourgeoisie, or no, that it's against the proletariat, and that it's for the bourgeoisie. Lenin, in his article, "The Socialist Revolution and the Rights to Nations to Self-Determination," published in 1916, so this was his mature work, writes in the second section, "The Socialist Revolution and the Struggle for Democracy," it would be no less mistaken to delete any of the points of the democratic program. For example, the point of self-determination of nations, on the ground that it is, quote, infeasible, and unquote, or that it is, quote, illusory and unquote, under imperialism. The assertion that the right of nations to self-determination cannot be achieved within the framework of capitalism must be understood either in its absolute economic sense, or in the conventional political sense. The domination of finance capital, as of capital in general, cannot be abolished by any kind of reforms in the realm of political democracy, and self-determination belongs wholly and exclusively to this realm. The domination of finance capital, however, does not in the least destroy the significance of political democracy as the freer, wider, and more distinct form of class oppression and class struggle. So, and he goes on to say the semi-colonial countries. He's referring to mainly Asia, but this can be applied to the to indigenous nations because they were colonized under, or they were considered nations outside the U.S. That's why there were treaties written. But now that they're colonized and subsumed within the nation state, there is still a colonialism. You can call it can be settler colonialism if you want to reduce it to just colonialism. The same definition applies. And Lenin continues saying, in these countries, the bourgeois democratic movements have either hardly begun or are far from being completed in the colonial countries. Socialists must not only demand the unconditional and immediate liberation of the colonies without compensation, and this demand in its political expression signifies nothing more nor less than the recognition of the right to self-determination, but must render determined support to the new revolutionary elements in the bourgeois democratic movements for national liberation in these countries and assist the rebellion, if need be, the revolutionary war, against the imperialist powers that oppress them. So the discussion that, indigenous peoples are creating a national bourgeoisie of indigenous peoples is true, but Lenin says, one, that's inevitable, because unless you create fully automated gay space luxury capitalism, because socialism, just like Lenin wanted, you can't. Capitalism will find its way into creating new markets, whether it be in the industrial first world countries, or in the colonized third world countries, or in the fourth world indigenous countries that are subsumed already within different countries. But also that it's the duty of Marxists to actually fight for that self-determination, knowing that capitalism will seep its way into these new nations, into these indigenous nations, but fight and help the revolutionary aspects of the bourgeois democratic national liberationist movements to then nudge them into socialism. So if you're saying that indigenous fights for treaty rights is just race war, it's against Marxism, Lenin completely disagrees with you. And he says, be pragmatic, understand that, once you have the first step of decolonization, which is independence and political sovereignty, capitalism and imperialism will find its way in. And it's now your job to help the part of that indigenous nation who wants to fight for socialism, it's the job of Marxists to help that sector against the bourgeoisie that is open, but not reject self-determination and not reject this land back just because capitalism is an inevitable result of it. And I think that's a foolishness that I'm seeing a lot of recently. That is like that just because we talk about race and just because we talk about indigenous nationhood, somehow we're somehow against class solidarity, when it should be the other way around. And if you actually read Lenin,
Exactly.
it would be completely true. And it's this. I'm sure it's the same for Vietnam. It was the same for China. It was the same for India, and the list goes on and on. And it was the same. It was the same for like Burkina Faso, for Egypt, and the list goes on and on and on.
Exactly. Ho Chi Minh spent his entire life writing so many articles and so many books, and the whole Ho Chi Minh thought was about how the liberation movement of Vietnam is totally like perfectly like parallel with the liberation of the working class, of the global working class. And then to think that indigenous people trying to gain our self-determination is something against the proletariat, I don't get it. That is the very white supremacist interpretation of our liberation, and it is ridiculous. Anyone else? Do you have any thought about this? Yeah.
This actually kind of reminds me. Lenin even had written a couple things about New Zealand. It was an article he did quite a while. Well, obviously he did it quite a while ago. He hasn't been alive a very long time. But he wrote this article. It was mainly about the Australian Labor Party of the time, but he did also have an offhand comment about the settler population of Aotearoa, and he was surprisingly accurate in his classification or his description. He describes them as a country of inveterate, backwards, thick-headed, egotistical Philistines who've brought their civilization with them from England and kept it to themselves like a dog in a manger. I always have a bit of a giggle remembering that one, but it was actually extremely accurate because the entire, I guess, selling point for people to settle, because the settling was done by a company that was called the New Zealand Company. They had advertised just like, buy yourself a little piece of home in this far off land in the South Pacific, has very familiar geography. You'll feel like you're right at home. They forgot to mention the part where they didn't actually have all the land to give away, and they expected everyone who came on those ships to help get it, which unfortunately a lot of them did do. But yeah, New Zealand was constructed as a project of basically building a home away from home because of the familiar climate and geography to Great Britain that we have here. Although I will say that we're a much sunnier place than Great Britain. But anyway, that's kind of always been in the social consciousness of the settler population here in this country, of sort of being of like I guess Little England or Little Britain. And I think what's most horrifying of all that a lot of people just don't pay attention to is the fact that the New Zealand government that we have now is the New Zealand Company. Like, the New Zealand Company, it kind of, all its assets were a little bit up in the air, and then the New Zealand government was formed to succeed the New Zealand Company. It was actually quite frightening, like, realizing that I'm just like, so like this entire time this country's been a company town. Yeah. And so that's sort of like had I guess changed the way that I see a lot of the colonization here, as well as that there's also like a corporate aspect to our entire state structure, which is another good reason for decolonization, because I would rather not have our country run by what used to be a colonizing company.
I mean, yeah.
That sounds like
That's
a solid
a
idea.
kind of yeah. I mean, that's another conversation. People are talking about that about this a lot. Is about the land back and the land reform, and lots of people like who don't understand it. They say like land back is not land reforms, and they support land reforms but not land back. The panel can have an answer about this, but like I can maybe me first, because like I can give you some examples of about land back and land reforms in Vietnam that did happen in Vietnam in the 1940s and 1950s. First, we had our successful communist revolution in 1945, and we took our land back. We took our land back from the hands of the fascist Japan and the colonialist France. And then 9 years later, after we spent the next extra 9 years fighting the colonial French when they tried to come back to Vietnam to colonize us again, and we spent the next 5 years fighting it, and then we won again. In 1954, we had land reforms right after we won against the French. So what do you say here? You cannot have land reforms when you don't own your own land. Did you seriously like believe that Vietnamese were just like the fascist Japans and the colonist French to fucking like do land reforms for us? So land back is the first step, and then you do the land reforms, and that is very important thing that you have to understand. You cannot build socialism on a stolen land. You cannot do the land reforms when the thieves are still in charge of that land. I hope that you understand this. And it doesn't mean that when we do land reforms, it doesn't mean that like we kick out all the people that we don't like. We offer them to stay, and they have the right to stay. But before that, they are owning like rubber tree plantations. They owning slaves, and and peasants, and like my grandparents, they own like peasants for generation. We took the land, the too much of land that they own, and then we redistributed to other poor peasants, other Vietnamese people, and even the landlords. They were given an equal piece of land and a small house as equal as other families in the village. That is how land reforms works. It doesn't mean that we have an ethno state, we kick out all white people out and we take your houses or something. No, it means that we take the land, for example, like Mark Zuckerberg, right? He's owning a half of Hawaii right now. And if we do land reforms in Hawaii right now, it means that like we would take all the half of the Hawaii island back, and then if Zuckerberg wants to live here, want to have a home here, okay, he's gonna receive a small house and a piece of farm equally with other Hawaiian people living on that island. That is what we meant. All right, and yeah, what do you think about the Silver Spook, like the land back and land reform, if that happened in Hawaii?
Yeah, just speaking on that, Mark Zuckerberg had a 700-acre ranch on Kauai that was displacing Native Hawaiians like myself from our hunting, fishing, gathering grounds and our land generally that he barely lived on. And him and his partner suing the state of Hawaii in order to push them to displace further Hawaiians. And in collaboration with the University of Hawaii professors, in fact, as a fence to purchase recently another 600 acres. So Mark Zuckerberg currently has about 1,300 acres of Kauai personally. Like, the game Neofeud behind me, it's about the highest stage of capitalism. I call it neo-feudal. Giannis Varoufakis calls it techno-feudal post-capitalism. I call it neo-feudal post-capitalism. It's the shadow thrones of 100 billion times $200 billion worth of stacked dead white war criminals to the height of stadiums, sitting on those and then answering on high for the planet, controlling entire world governments, entire international systems of trade, and in fact, like cannibalizing, and this is a very important point, cannibalizing, turning America into a Gucci-built landfill slash, electricity-less, crashing 737, teachers being forced to like pay for their own substitute teachers in San Francisco when they get chemotherapy that they can't afford, right? The quality of life is rapidly declining. This is what puzzles me. And Hawaii is the ultra America in certain senses. Oahu, like I said, 6 times more Native Hawaiians and people of color shot by cops than white people. It's like twice the rate of people of color being shot, murdered by cops, and George Floyd did in North America. The highest rate of mass incarceration of Native Hawaiians, the highest concentration of billionaires on the planet. Japanese Genshiro Kawamoto buying up 25 acres for $200 million of Hawaii just for fun. Larry Ellison, I think somewhere on the high score list of the Force 500 video game called Global Imperialism. I think he's like number 7 right now. I forget where he is. Larry Ellison, he got the Chinese TikTok in order to make it racist, make America's social media racist again and not have like indigenous people like the cranberry juice guy to the top. The indigenous TikTok was blowing up when it was not Western capitalist surveillance, Silicon Valley, Death Star controlled. In fact, Larry Ellison with Donald Trump cut a deal in the new Cold War, hopefully it doesn't turn nuclear hot war. Larry Ellison got control of TikTok. He bought all of Lanai for $330 million, one of our islands in, I think the noughties or early teens. And he plays basketball with Shaq and has Beyonce personally playing concerts on his 200-foot yachts with coolies of Micronesian and Filipino and other ancestry, catching his gold-plated basketballs in his personal private island resort. That's one of our islands. So Bill Gates tried to buy all of Maui at one point. That there's too much outrage from that one. So he's quietly just gobbling up bits of it. Oprah owns an entire highway which she had to allow Native Hawaiians and locals to escape the climate change fires, which U.S. military is the number 1 emitter of carbon fuels. And the next 100 corporations that produce 70% of the carbon emissions are backed by global capitalism enforced by the U.S. Death Star and imperialism of the world over. And anyway, so Hawaii is, I bring this up, it's ultra-American in all the worst ways, but it's still Hawaiian in all the best ways, And so we continue to try to resist the Mark Zuckerbergs who are gobbling up as much land as they can by mass actions on Mauna Kea, whether that's like the biggest mass action, the biggest mass mobilization of the U.S. military and police in the highest per capita occupation of the U.S. military, the head of the Indo-Pacific Command, which is as the war criminal. Every American president is a war criminal, by the way. So, Hawaii is must have Hawaii to get our share of China. Hawaii is the American Hong Kong to pillage multi-hundred trillions of dollars from Western capitalism into Asia, including Vietnam as well. Hawaii was a staging platform, by the way, to bomb into the Stone Age, Luna Oi's grandpa and that country with Agent Orange and fire and shooting children. Uyghurs were murdered, by the way. So all of you who care so much about you don't care about Muslims, don't care about Chinese. Westerners really care about Chinese Muslims. So America was the number one the number one bombing of Uyghurs was in 2018. It was announced to the U.S. military. So I'm sorry if I'm throwing some shade at the vets right now, but you got to do your own internal work. The number one bombing of Uyghurs was, in fact, in the biggest day of bombing in the history of that disastrous multi-trillion-dollar disaster and war crime in Afghanistan was in Eastern Afghanistan before ETIM was delisted from the terrorist Brzezinski chessboard war game called Trying to Stop Russia and China from building Belt and Roads to bring peace. It was actually bombing of Uyghurs practice on the Mauna Kea, which I'm streaming on the Big Island. I'm streaming 30 miles from the staging area from which they launched the B-52s to go bomb Uyghurs in Eastern Afghanistan and then blame China for all the genocide. But anyways, which the FP is apparently coming back on that one. So long story short, Hawaii is important both because there will not be liberation for anyone under the global empire, which is the United States, that is at the headquarters, at the forefront of that, which uses Hawaii as the number one platform for pillaging Asia, for launching the Raptors and launching nuclear submarines into the South China Sea to accidentally start hot war with Taiwan. Do you want to have Mad Max and Fallout and nuclear annihilation of everything on Earth? Because if you want it, that's a good way to get it. Just start crashing nuclear subs and breaking the one China policy and doing disastrous things, which Hawaii is weaponized against. So Landback, I would argue Landback is not only essential for Native Hawaiians, it's also essential for de-escalating global imperial military industrial complex, which are the number one escalating factors in maintenance of global capitalism and global colonialism, and in burning. You care about ecology, burning fuels. Again, this is the number one climate emitter and enforcer. It's the number one reason why countries which might consider turning away are forced by the military industrial complex, like Australia with ASPI, like Canada being forced to kidnap countries for new Cold Wars that America, the reigning Roman, the Romans and Americans have a lot in common. They put eagles, the Aquila in Roman times, the American has this eagle. They have senates, right, where they pretend to have democracies, but they're actually just oligarchies and mass murderous. They had centurions and phalanxes and spears. Americans have F-35s and.
Oops, I think we lost Silver's book again. I think the electricity is
looks like another
him.
power.
Wow, it's so sad. Yeah. Talking about that, it's one very small point I want to talk about. I see a lot of Western leftists, especially white, they totally anti-landback. Here's the thing, if you're leftist and you're anti-landback, it means you are literally defending the right for billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos to own as much land as possible. If you're anti-landback.
I also want to point out, before I started streaming, just a small little bit over a year ago, I walked into a leftist stream where I watched two white, one communist and one was an anarchist, and they had a map of the North America, and they were splitting it up amongst each other, and they still had reservations for us Native people. And I'm going, yeah, no. So the problem that we find is that some have this idea that they are the ones that are going to now take over and be the new form of colonization. And colonization, no matter how you slice it and dice it, is still colonization. Doesn't matter whether you throw little new twerks or tweaks into it, it's still colonization. You're still trying to genocide indigenous people. And everything that
last year we even said it happened in the past. That colonization only happened in the past and everything is done now. It's good now.
Yeah, no, colonization is still going on. it's still an ongoing process. We still have murdered and missing Indigenous people. We still have the colonizers still trying to cut into what's supposed to be under treaty Indigenous lands and making it smaller and bringing things like Line 3 and pipelines and stuff through it, trying to still dig in for uranium unsafely and unhealthily, which leaves, after they're digging of like all these different materials, literally leaves the area where the reservations are almost in a dead zone with like cancer and all kinds of other stillborn calves, stillborn babies, all kinds of health issues or unclean water. And I mean, we're in 2021. There should be no place on the planet that has unclean water, except for the factor of, oh, wait, there's a one group of people that get clean water. The rest of us don't. And that also includes like the parasitical landlords that are sitting back claiming rent off of lands they don't actually own.
Yeah.
If I could, in the case, well, a few things. I absolutely agree with you, Lasso. You're making a very good explanation of like how Marxists and anarchists, like leftists, are making mistakes about talking about native sovereignty and also colonization. Settler colonialism is happening every day. If it wasn't real, Indigenous peoples wouldn't be on reservations. Simple enough. Reservations were built as territories that were outside of the scope of that were basically soft concentration camps for Indigenous peoples to go and be controlled by the U.S. government, so that at some points they choose to leave and assimilate into modern American life, or they die from the low economic, health, environmental standards that most reservations have. But also because those reservation lands exist, it also means there are territories that the U.S. doesn't have full control over. So that's why reservations are decreased over the years. Reservation lands are decreased. Like in the case of Bear Ears under the Donald Trump administration, he actually reduced the size of the Bear Ears reservation. I don't know if it's the reservation or if it was 5 nations territories, but he essentially reduced it and started thinking about either timber or mineral extraction. That's a form for. I'm not a Marxist, mind you, but what was it? I think Marxism has a lot to that it can explain about settler colonialism on indigenous lands, and that is a form of primitive accumulation, ladies, gentlemen, non-binary folks.
Yep.
Like that is primitive accumulation. The extraction of capital, the extraction of resources that can be used as capital, and the reduction of lands of non-used lands to be then opened up by markets. That is primitive accumulation 101, and that's what reservation lands being decreased is. It's a form of settler colonialism continually happening. I think, what was it, if we ever do have a successful land back movement, what was it? It's not going to be an ethno state, mind you. Like, let's take the case of McGirth v. Oklahoma, the landmark 2020 Supreme Court case, where the Supreme Court said 43% of Oklahoma is actually reservation land. 43% of the entire state of Oklahoma became reservation land overnight. And at that moment, the Muskogee, the Seminole, the Cherokee, and all the 5 nations that were there, their first action wasn't, hey, and this also included parts of Tulsa, one of the largest cities in Oklahoma. Now, indigenous nations and peoples didn't say, now that we own parts of the majority of Oklahoma, why they didn't say, let's kick out all the white people. They said, because mind you, they not only had power as a reservation, but they had jurisdiction and tribal court jurisdiction over those territories, which became a worry for a lot of settlers. But indigenous people said, no, we're just going to see how we can use this to solve crimes that were in ambiguous legal territory, and that didn't allow us to prosecute criminals from outside our reservations going into our reservations to commit crimes, because then they can get off scot-free, because it's a weird legal gray zone in the reservation. They wanted to solve a crime that was being committed mainly by settlers on reservation lands. There was never and controlling 43% of a state is huge, but there was never any talk about mass deportations or exclusions. So it's an absurd argument. Lastly, or two more things. I know I talk a lot, but I want to give like a lot of historical.
Totally fine. People love it.
No,
people love to hear your rant. So just.
I feel special here. Quechua Aymara pride here. And so I think in the U.S. a very important thing, not just for natives, but also an important native intellectual piece of history is the 1972 Trail of Broken Treaties document, or the American Indian Movement, known as AIM, AIM, their 20-point position paper, in which they argue for the U.S. returning 110 million acres of land back to indigenous nations. How much is 100? Just to be real, the United States is over 2 billion acres. 110 million is a lot, yes, but it isn't the entirety of the United States. What it shows is that indigenous peoples know what a middle ground is, and also understand that they're not out here for a race war. They're out here for recognizing indigenous sovereignty. Also, one of the prologue to this whole thing says, Trail of Broken Treaties for renewal of contracts, reconstruction of Indian communities, and securing an Indian future in America. That one, indigenous nations would be that means indigenous peoples didn't want separatism. They wanted sovereignty recognized, but also being a part of the United States. And you know what that sounds like? Plurinationality, plurinationalism. The same way in Latin America, indigenous nations are recognized. Two, indigenous nations are recognized as having a certain territorial land base that has certain autonomy to the government. And on those territories, there are specific legal, political, economic structures that fit within the indigenous nations culture and decolonized political structures, but also allowing for educational structures that help indigenous peoples to maintain indigenous identity. And in the case of Bolivia, and in a similar case in the case of Bolivia, Evo Morales passed a 2012 law to promote indigenous languages. Essentially in territories where indigenous peoples are a majority and are seen as having autonomy, not only are indigenous people supposed to know be taught Quechua, Aymara, Guarani, Mojeño, etc., but so are the non-indigenous peoples. So in the past, it was always that indigenous peoples needed to be assimilated to learn Spanish so that they can be part of the nation state and then forget their indigenous languages. Now it's that indigenous peoples can learn Spanish, but the non-indigenous peoples have to learn the indigenous language too, so that there's one proper communication amongst every person within that region. So it's not just one native language and then let's say Aymara is the native language of Bolivia now. So everyone who's Quechua, Guarani, Mojeño has to learn Aymara. No, it's regional. That means on a local basis, you see which indigenous people is the majority and you teach that language. Aymara in La Paz, Quechua in Cochabamba, Guarani in Santa Cruz, etc. And it also means, so in the United States, an example could be indigenous peoples are form a part of the reservation. They are helping the economy. They're not removed from their houses. They just have to follow indigenous laws, but they're also supposed to learn indigenous languages support the new reservation government, as well as contribute to the economy of both the United States and the reservation and the indigenous nation that finally had its land back, as settlers, but as ones who are promoting and helping indigenous sovereignty, because every indigenous peoples need workers too, and are workers too, and they could probably learn indigenous languages. It's not about kicking people out. In a decolonized future, it would be about settlers renouncing what was it, the need to exclude and also eliminate indigenous peoples in genocide. There can be a harmony where we recognize not only indigenous sovereignty that we're now under, but help maintain that. And in Bolivia, there isn't just an immediate jump to socialism, mind you. The Evo Morales government, and now the Luis Arce government, both socialists, and in Ecuador, Rafael Correa's government, and in Peru with Pedro Castillo, who himself is like a radical campesino, a peasant farmer. They all try to manage capitalism so that multinational corporations aren't controlling the majority of the stocks and the resources that they're extracting, but now the government is able to control them too, control them, regulate them, and also tax them highly to then redistribute to social programs. In Peru, the plan is called the popular economy with markets, or el mercado popular con mercados. So the whole point is that these can be models and it's a transition from neoliberalism to a post-neoliberal and potentially socialist government. And I think the United States can do it. From what I've seen, Luna, Vietnam has a similar system of the government managing markets and making sure that they're regulated, but also that they have control over certain key resources and national industries like energy and health. So I think the United States, indigenous nations can do that too. Let's not think that land back it will just be capitalist, or it has to be immediately socialist. There has to be a transition. If you don't do that, you're not being pragmatic. So
Rob, you're not a Marxist, but you understand Marxism very well.
Thank you. And that's why I'm like confused. I'm like, I'm not a Marxist. I'm an indigenous, and the people who are Marxists are utopians.
Like, what the hell? I am so mad because recently I've been attacked by, I don't know, suddenly from the middle of nowhere, a bunch of Uncha just came to me and attacked me and called me a utopianist, for believing that there must be a transitional period, that we have to build socialism. And suddenly I am a utopianist. I could never get it.
They could say you're on the same level, you have a similar economic thought to Evo Morales, but no one would say Evo Morales is a utopian anti-communist. But that was his plan. And Luis Arce, his selected president, or the selected successor, now the president of Bolivia, he was actually Evo Morales' economy minister. He was the one running the economy under Evo Morales, and now he's the president. And he's the one who wrote this plan. And it's called let me just say it out for people real quick. It's a long name. The New Economic, Social, Communitarian, Productive Model. It's a long name, and it's a plural economy. There are corporations, there are cooperatives, and there are state-run industries, but they all have to work in harmony. And the point of the state is to manage the resources and taxes, and also regulate the markets when it's in whack, to both stimulate the economy, but also fund social programs and industrialize the country, but on indigenous terms. That's not a radical idea. That's literally what's being implemented in Peru, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, and it's very successful in Bolivia. Bolivia is one of the most successful socialist economies in Latin America. Even the World Bank can admit that. The World Bank hates socialism, and they're like, yeah, Bolivia is a good model. It's surprising, but we have to admit that. So
it's The thing is that like it is also a fact like Marx actually he got a lot of ideas about communism from indigenous people, from us.
Yes.
So
He
very
did.
proud.
You know what? His anthropology was influenced by a guy named Lewis Henry Morgan in the 1800s. And it wasn't that he got the idea of communism from indigenous peoples. Rather, he used indigenous communities to show proof that communism can work. So what does that mean? That indigenous communities show that communism is possible even before an industrialized structure. That's some Marxists like to call that primitive communism, but that's also a very Western historical structure. Like, it's a very Western and colonizing historical trajectory. It's called positivism. It's bad. It's antiquated. It's a 19th century philosophy that no one really uses anymore. But Marx understood that indigenous economics is show that human nature it wasn't inherently capitalist, that it was proof that communism could work. So why don't we just go back to those models, but update them for the 21st century and decolonize with those? We can use Marxist principles in indigenous economics, but we don't have to subordinate ourselves to them. We don't have to just copy the model of the Soviet Union or China and just say, yeah, that works. Now let's do it in Bolivia or on the Sioux reservation, on the Rosebud Sioux reservation, or the Navajo Nation. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think as well, like, I mean, even with China, they specifically readapted their conditions because they realized that just copying the Soviets model wasn't going to work for them. So even within other like places where Marxism's been like the guiding idea, guiding like
Vietnam got a big
principles.
lesson. Vietnam learned a big lesson from it. Yeah, we tried to copy the Soviet style, but we failed for 10 years. We failed.
And that's kind of one of my things as an indigenous Marxist is like I think Marxism is a very good tool for analysis, but that it doesn't necessarily mean we have to copy what everyone else is doing before, because what everyone else was doing was what they were doing because of their very specific history. And also just kind of offhandedly, I just remembered hearing that Quechua and Aymara, there's actually something of a connection there between my people, Maori, and that area of South America, and it's that we have a variety of sweet potato that we call the kumara. It's kind of a staple in our thing, and it wasn't until it's been known for a little while that the sweet potato only really came from this part of South America. But for a while, a lot of European theorists had sort of said, I guess they just floated on the ocean, but that doesn't really explain how the word that we ended up picking for this vegetable ended up being pretty similar, I hear. I've just heard around that I believe it's either an Aymara or Quechua. I can't remember which one, but there's a similar word for the sweet potato.
Is it kumal?
Yes, that is it. Yeah.
I mean,
it's khoai lang in Vietnamese.
Awesome,
it's
like
khoai lang in Vietnamese.
Really nice. Yeah, no, I think there's those. What was it? People don't understand that indigenous peoples had massive trade routes before colonization, and they were like international. Tupac, there's a theory that Tupac Yupanqui, who was I believe the 9th or 10th Inca, that he actually he had a large voyage, because he was the Inca that had expanded Tawantinsuyo, the land of 4 territories, or the quote unquote Inca Empire, towards the north, to what is now the north of Peru and Ecuador. But also that he had made voyages, and he had voyaged from the Pacific, towards the Pacific, from the coast of Peru, and that it's theorized that he probably reached the Polynesian islands, and he probably reached Aotearoa and different and traded with folks around the Pacific Islands, and that also it's potentially that the Rapa Nui are descendants or had very close contact with the Incas prior to colonization. So what was it? I wouldn't be surprised if like we just share the same word and it's like, yeah, we traded like way back and now we're just we're just siblings with the same potato. Like,
yeah.
But wait a
There's-
minute, capitalism invented trade and money and all
That's
kinds of stuff
true.
like that.
You're exactly
it's
true.
impossible.
Before capitalism, there was no history. You're right. Indigenous peoples, like
Yeah.
just scratching our butts, man.
I don't know. We just live in our caves and do nothing, I guess.
I want to point out that there is a historical place that's at the time was the biggest and largest planned city on the planet, which is called Poverty Point, and it's in now called the U.S. in the land now called United States. Poverty Point was the largest planned trade city in the world. And it is a historical fact. It is a historical land base in the United States. This is where indigenous people from all over the world got together and traded. People from South America, Central, North, our Polynesian relatives, even our Asian relatives got together and all met up to trade. Also, intermarriages. This is a historical fact. As well, I dropped the link for a Twin Rabbit video. We all love Twin Rabbit around here, and if you don't know who that is, you sure the hell should learn.
Shout out to Twin Rabbit.
Right? Luna, I dropped the link in the little chat log here on the thing here.
Yep.
For the people in YouTube if you wanted to. I dropped also the link in Discord or in the Twitch channel not too long ago. That will tell you the whole entire complete history of how the European leftism started and came from, and actually came from.
Yeah, it's kind of another interesting thing is like
Wait a minute, our comrade Silver is back. Welcome back.
Hello.
Hey everybody, sorry. Not today, CIA. You can't take me out like that just because I'm on a roll. No. The electricity fully went out. It's raining it's raining super hard right now. But anyways, yeah.
Cola, do we need to
Same
get the duct
here.
tape?
What the hell? It's raining so hard here too in Vietnam.
Yeah. Come on. You got to get this Western capitalism, under control. It's going to keep raining so hard, if we can't get this climate. Anyway. Yeah.
Okay, Jan, what are you talking about?
Sorry.
Oh. Yeah, what was I talking about? Yeah, oh, it was I remember. It was I do remember some scientists or whatever had done some I forget where the paper was, but it was analysis of like the genetics of people from Rapa Nui that did indicate that there was mixture with some group of people from the South Americas, which I thought was to be expected. I wouldn't be surprised if that had happened. And I think as well there was also some along the west coast of the Americas where they had found admixture of Polynesian among their genetics. And it's kind of interesting because like these are things that I suppose we had already known about and could have been known about much sooner if they had maybe asked. It's been kind of a funny thing in recent years of science like confirming these things that we had been talking about for a while, which seems to be a running thing fairly often. Of us mentioning something, then being like, "Oh no, that's crazy," and then they go look into it, and they're just like, maybe you weren't incorrect.
We just have a donation from the Good Morning. Thank you so much for your donation. There's no message, but yeah, I believe that is a solidarity with all of us. And I think that our show is gonna end in the next 10 minutes. So I think it's time for us to have the final message to the audience. Let's start from, well, let's say Silver Spook. What do you want to say to the audience?
Okay. Hey, audience. Anyways, thanks so much for listening. Mahalo nui loa, as we say here in Hawaii, on their continued U.S. military occupation and fraudulent annexation. But I think like the takeaway I hope that people get from this, I can be kind of like kukanaka, as we say. The word for stand up like a man is not gendered in, and also this is something we didn't even talk about, but the lack of patriarchy and the full acceptance of gender fluidity and multiple gender expressions or something. And sometimes I can do kukanaka means it means stand up like a human. And sometimes I stand up like a human a little extreme, like in a very intense way, but ultimately, right, to defend our sovereignty. And if you want to bash your head on the Great Wall of your own stupidity as a Western, on the Great Wall of global counter-hegemonic indigenous solidarity with various characteristics: Chinese, Vietnamese, Hawaiian, Quechua, Guarani. I have a Guarani friend, by the way. It's a very Santo Avero Ojeda from I believe Paraguay, and it's a great indigenous developer. But anyway, all of our peoples together, what we don't want. I hope that what comes through ultimately with this, panel that I helped to organize. Thanks so much everyone for being on. Thanks for Luna for hosting it. I hope that what people come away with is indigenous from whatever part of the planet that you're from, or space if you're an astronaut, if you're Martian. Don't colonize us. No, the point is that I think hopefully that you can start to realize that we want to exist in mutual respect. We want to live in and exist in what is often described as socialism and racial, economic, religious, also spiritual equality. We want to exist in ecological. We'd like to have a planet that is able to sustain life above amoeba and aphotic bacteria. Hopefully not. We don't exterminate due to like Permian extinction events, due to runaway climate change feedback loops. We want to mutually cooperate in win-win cooperation. We put together an Asia and Pacific Islander panel recently, and I hope this is a kind of continuation of these, which is that across the earth,
absolutely.
So we want to keep on learning about how we can, kind of get past. It's not really a new Cold War. It's not really a new Cold War between Western, Euro, G7, AUKUS or FROCUS or CANAUKUS. Canada, please don't join AUKUS. Okay, don't go down that path. Okay, self-destructive. You're gonna bash your head on a great steel wall of 1.4 billion people and socialism. Don't go down that path. We don't want to fight and smash our head against steel walls.
Oops. Oh no. We lost you again. Oh, Silver Spook, I'm so sorry. Your internet is out. I have to remove you right now. And then, well, I'm waiting for the switchback to finish his message. But for now, let's just listen to Sioux. What do you want to say as a final message to the audience?
First and foremost, I want to point out for those non-Indigenous people, as well as for some of our own Indigenous people, we are not the enemy they have claimed us to be. We are not the barbaric, primitive, savage, filthy, disgusting Indians that they claim us to be. We are nowhere near that at all. We are human beings just like the rest of you. We have feelings, we have emotions, we have lives, we have loved ones, all things just the same. We all bleed red blood when we cut. So that's the first and foremost message. And if you really want to know, please do your best when you're wanting to learn about Landback. Don't automatically assume that somebody who you might think is like your favorite leftist streamer, and they're spouting that Landback is horrible and bad. It's not. Really learn it from the source. Look up different books on Landback from Indigenous people, videos of Landback from Indigenous people. And Indigenous and Landback will mean different things depending upon the tribe we're talking about, and in the area and land in which you're situated. But we all universally agree that we're not evicting you. It's not about kicking out other people from other nationalities. It's about honoring the treaties that were originally made in the first place, of being able to share the land and live together. And I always laugh when I see these anti-immigrants talking about, if you're going to come to our country, learn our language and culture. Yet they came to our countries and didn't learn our language and culture. Instead, they enforced upon us barbaric, chaotic, and uncivilized.
They even banned our language. Ban
Yeah.
our language. They killed our own people, try to erase our culture and writings.
And we are not that enemy. I know we've had generations of watching, Indians and cowboy movies, old Westerns on TV. We all had to white people had to circle the wagons to protect themselves from Indigenous people coming to steal their cattle and whatnot. No, it's very simple. You were walking through a territory that did not belong to you, lands that did not belong to you. And it was very simple. It's the same thing that when you go to like different places and you try to now walk through like parks, and there's cops that show up and tell you that you can't be here after dark, or you can't be there during daylight. It's the same thing that they did. The only difference is, okay, we're willing to give you safe passage through our lands, but all we ask for is like one of your cattle in return. Yeah. That's barter system. And they turned around and were like, oh my God, you're stealing from us. No, we're not stealing. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. You pay your fare into going into Disneyland and everything else and all these other places that cost you money, or parks. You're paying the government a fare, a price to go through these lands, to go through that land. And then you're telling us that we're trying to steal from you and stop you. When we say, okay, going through our lands is going to have a little bit of a cost to go through it safely. Otherwise, we can't guarantee your safety. So it's very simple. It's basic common sense and understanding. But somehow that's barbaric and uncivilized and just rude and disgusting of us. But it's acceptable when your own people do it to you. Try and walk into somebody's house without you actually living there. If you live in the United States, you're a good chance of getting shot. Called trespassing. Right? But that's accepted.
But when we do it, we are barbaric. But when we do it, we're barbaric.
Yeah. We get called barbaric, right? Even through COVID. The first over 6 months of COVID in both United States and Canada, the government only gave us body bags. They gave the rest of the population all kinds of medical supplies. And then once the vaccines started to come out, the testing ground for those vaccines were on reservations. Here's a shit ton of vaccines. Let's see if it kills you all or not. before we give it to the rest of the population. Oh, wait, it actually works? Oh, okay, well, here's more. Once the reservation started to get 95% or more of the population vaccinated, they all turned around and went, all of you people who are sitting here waiting for the government to debate on whether or not who gets the vaccine first and which people get it first, come to the reservation. You get your free vaccine on the house. It's free. We're not charging you a penny for it. Come get it for free. Time and time, we have constantly shown we are not the barbaric, savage Indians, primitive Indians that the narrative pushes. Time and time, our people have shown that we are not these people. So when you hear people talking like that, whether it's on the right or the left or the center or whatever, realize that they're perpetrating propaganda. They're lying. They believe and believe this lie so much because it benefits only them. It doesn't benefit all of us. We're all human beings. The path to a true human being is very important, because within that path, you discover that all people, regardless of their skin color, nationality, sexual preference, are all human beings. We're all human. And we have to come together. And if that doesn't make you wake up your mind, just look outside at the climate change. We either come together as human beings or we die off as a species. Mother Earth can shake us off at any time that she wants, just like the dinosaurs. But luckily, or I don't know if it's unfortunate or luckily for the dinosaurs, they didn't have the brain power or capability that we had. And unfortunately, because of all the methane gas that came from their bodies when they, had to go to the bathroom, it caused that whole entire effect to happen because there were so many of them. Now we as a human species are doing the same damn thing. We're doing the exact same thing. We're causing such a problem to the environment and to the earth only for the reason of greed. And we're causing that environment, and we can be easily wiped off our Mother Earth just like that. Unless we as human beings start coming together. Stop all the drama, stop all the bullshit, stop all the lying, and just come together as human beings and fix what's wrong. It's important for all of us, not just us Indigenous people, but for all of us. And if you have to come and hang out with us Indigenous people and learn our traditional practices and way of how we did stewardship of the lands and the way in which we did farming, then so be it. Come hang out with us. Cool. Learn. Because many people are now having food sovereignty issues, home sovereignty issues, medical sovereignty issues, or security. Not just us, all of us. Not just one group, all of us are having this issue. And we need to come together to find a solution and to fix the problem so that generations that come will live. So that the people will live. That's my speech for the night. I want to thank you all greatly for having me on.
Wow, thank you so much. Very beautiful words and very powerful. Yeah, I deeply moved with all the words that you said. Like, we've been living in harmony for thousands of years, and we have our own civilization, our own culture, and suddenly white people came here from the other side of the earth, and they killed us, they slaughtered us, they stole every single thing, and they enslaved our people. And then they claim that we are barbaric. To us, they are barbaric. To people like Like, gods, we don't need to kill other people to accumulate that much wealth. We don't need it. We don't need that much wealth. But like to us, the European, the first settlers, they were the barbaric here. Because they did all of those things to us. The things that we could never even imagine to do to any kind of like living thing on earth. Like it's very sad. And Yarn, I want to hear what you want to say to the audience.
I guess with my closing thing is I guess for settler descended people here, I understand that having to stand aside for something that is a lot bigger than ourselves that is a difficult thing to face and a difficult thing to confront. But it's just an incredibly important thing to be doing, to be able to see the people that of the lands that you currently dwell in, seeing the ways that they can help restore, like Lost Sioux, for example. He was talking about the vaccine stuff, and over here we've had a similar issue where Maori population were among the least vaccinated populace amongst the average, and the reason for that is entirely down to accessibility, and also the fact that like we don't have a lot of faith in our health system for very good reasons. Like the statistics have come out recently that have shown that we are very often discriminated against in the medical sector here, even though we have a universal healthcare that's still with strings attached. But in the areas where vaccination rates for Maori have been well, has also been places where the tribal authorities of the area have been able to take charge with their own health services. And with these, they've been able to vaccinate not just the Maori population, but everyone. But because they are so localized, and because they are, amongst their own people, they're able to actually distribute the vaccine. Like, for example, my home district, it's quite large. It only in its entire area, it only has 4 vaccination clinics, and I'm pretty sure 2 of them are in one city. And so you've got one city, and the rest is mostly rural. You have basically just 2 vaccination centers, and they've been wondering why the rates haven't been so well. Well, there you go. The question of things like sovereignty and accessibility for Indigenous people, I think, also just generally has knock-on effects for the settler population as well, like good effects. Because with our practices, we I think we did a fairly good job of having kind of, I guess, a mixture of decentralized and centralized systems, even down to the way our tribes work. Within our tribes, there's so the tribes themselves are called iwi, and then they have within them a hapu, or sub-tribes, I guess. And these were just kind of ways of, I guess, divvying up responsibilities across the area. These forms of governance that we had established and still use within some of the tribes today to try and take care of these things, they've actually been a benefit to everyone in the area, like settler and Māori alike. And so I think seeing things like this is just like, I really hope that our settled population, which we call Pākehā, my hope is that they're able to see that I think letting go of your pride of this this imagination of having built a little England in the South Pacific. I hope that little imagined society is able to vanish, because it only really existed in their imaginations. And I guess that's my thing, is just like the things that we want to do, they are for your benefit as well. If we do something, it's just like, oh, if we do this, then it means we have to evict and deport all these people. Then obviously the solution is, okay, no, there's a better way of approaching this. It's not a matter of who has the deed to what property, but how is this land managed? Who is it managed by? And is it actually being looked after well? It's a little all over the place.
Totally agree with you. Like, yeah, supporting us is actually helping you. So please consider that. What about you, Amauta? What do you have to say?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, land back is just indigenous peoples getting back our lands, and that we want to develop a harmony. We want to redevelop the harmony with nature that we that is going to that will solve climate change. If climate change will, like, I had this argument once. Someone said, "Oh, if we de-develop and degrowth industrialism, we just like reduce it down. That's a form of Malthusianism that is going to reduce the human population, because it's going to reduce the production that we have, meaning that people are going to either die off, or not as many children will be born." And that this is a form of like Malthusian thought for everyone. Like, you can look up Malthus. I'm not going to explain it right now. There's not enough time. But essentially, it's that population reduction will happen because we deindustrialize. I told this person that actually climate change is its own form of Malthusianism, because by destroying the environment, it reduces the productivity of both the efficiency of the machinery, because now you don't have as many resources, meaning that will lead to the destruction of the population. That is population reduction that becomes inevitable by the way we destroy the earth. So industrialism is actually also a Malthusianism, and I would argue that indigenous environmentalism tries to avoid that option, the one where the inevitable collapse of human civilizations occurs. But regardless, land back is just us getting back our lands. It's not about throwing anyone out. It's about having people respect indigenous sovereignty. It's also about at this point, it's about plurinationalism, about indigenous peoples being part of the nation states that they're subsumed into, but having autonomy and self-determination to decide our futures based on our sovereignties between us and the central states, or the federal or centralized states that we're engaged with. And the peoples that are non-natives, you'll get to live in that territory too. You just have to respect indigenous laws, as the great indigenous leader in Bolivia, Felipe Quispe Huanca, or El Mailku. Mailku mean Mallku. He said, what was it? He was actually one of the leaders of the indigenous movement in Bolivia, and he actually led movements that brought down two presidents in Bolivia, the one in 2001 and one in 2003, and another in 2005. And it paved the way for Evo Morales' elections. So he's that important. He led the Aymara movement in La Paz, and he said, "Yes, white people, we're not going to throw you out. You just have to follow Indian laws," and that's the simple answer. There's no. But before I go, I do want to offer up materials for folks, because I'm sure people are going to be interested about land back, about indigenous theory. My focus is definitely on the Andes, but I do want to give importance to the indigenous theories that we've had for a long time now. So it's going to be a couple of books. Don't worry. Most of them are Marxist. We have 7 interpretive essays by Jose Carlos Mariátegui, who is the premier Marxist in Peru. Anyone who knows indigenous Marxism should know Mariátegui. Then there's this book, Tempestad en los Andes. It's only in Spanish, but it was written by Luis E. Valcárcel. Luis E. Valcárcel. And the prologue is actually written by Jose Carlos Mariátegui, basically giving his blessing to the Mariátegui giving his blessing to Valcárcel. And then I have the book La Revolución India, or The Indian Revolution, by Fausto Reinaga, who was a Marxist and then an Indianist. His own form of Incan communist, his own form of decolonial Incan communist in Bolivia, and he is the intellectual leader of indigenous Bolivia. Like everyone from Evo Morales to Álvaro Linera Garcia, who was the vice president of Evo Morales, to Felipe Quispe El Mailcu, all trace themselves back in some way or another to La Revolución India and Fausto Reinaga. And this book was written, or had its prologue written, by Luis E. Valcárcel. So there's a tradition in the Andes between these 3 authors that directly inspire indigenous movements. I also want to recommend Huilca Habla un Campesino Peruano. It's only in Spanish. And this book talks about the land reform in Peru from an indigenous perspective, from one of the Quechua leaders. Redskin White Mask is an indigenous Marxist indigenous text from Canada. We the Indians, which was written by Hugo Blanco, a Marxist turned indigenous Marxist in Peru. The Red Deal by the Red Nation. They're an interesting group in the United States. You can be critical or not about them, but they offer an interesting mixture of land back and socialist praxis. And then The New World of Indigenous Resistance. It's an anthology that's answering a lot of stuff Noam Chomsky said about education and nation-state development, and it has texts by indigenous authors on plurinationalism. If I could recommend only 2 books, because most of them are only in English or only in Spanish, I would recommend The Red Deal, because it talks about Native movements in the U.S., and New World of Indigenous Resistance, because that one talks about indigenous movements in Latin America. So that's all I got to say. And also follow me on Instagram. My handle is Amauta, and on Twitter it's Amauta New, because I didn't know how to sign in on Twitter, and apparently it just reversed everything. So hope y'all enjoy reading.
If I may quickly, Luna, you're muted as well.
I'm sorry. I'm just saying, like, if you want to connect to the audience, you can all send me all the social medias, so I can just paste the link in my description. And that's it. Yes, Lawson?
I just wanted to say really quickly, when I was talking about the dinosaurs, yes, I realized that wasn't the whole reason for the whole entire extinction. Wasn't the whole reason for the extinction of the dinosaurs and what happened, but it did play a big part of it. So I'm always believing about being truthfully and honest, and making sure that if I make a mistake in what I'm speaking, that I correct it.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Yeah. Well, about anyone in the panel, if you want to share your social media, you can just type it in your private chat, and I can paste them in the chat if you want. My last message is very short and simple. I think it's just like please, like, try to listen to us more. Listen to our perspective, and if you don't understand anything about us, just go and ask. It would be so very happy to try to explain to you and try to to talk to you like that. So yeah, that is my biggest hope, that you, especially if you're white and you're from the West, just hope that you can learn to listen more, to talk less. And if you don't understand anything, again, as I said, just go ask us in a good faith, nicely. Hey, what do you mean when you say this? Can you please explain to me? like please like do that before you have any assumption in your mind. And it does, you don't need to agree with us about every single topic. It doesn't matter that much. All right, just try to listen, try to understand it before you have any assumption and conclusion. And that means a lot to us already. I guess we are not asking too much here. Just, hey, please listen to us and ask us. That's it. Yeah, thank you for all the book recommendation. I really appreciate that.
No problem.
Yeah,
People are
this
asking
is
me. People are asking me to flash the books, so because they want to write down the titles. So and also I will tweet them
Yeah.
out. DM me. I'm very glad to be an educator for everyone.
So this is our comrade Yron in the chat. I just sent the link. Thank you so much for being here. It's so great. It is really great to talk to like people of color from all over the world, talking about the problems that or the sufferings or the oppressions that we are bearing under this capitalist hellhole. And thank you so much. We are now reading to our comrade No Comment Chick in Twitch. Okay, I have to talk to the next 10 seconds. Shit, kind of shitty. All right, bye-bye, everybody. See you next time. I would love to bring you back sometime in the future to talk more about all the issues. Yep.
I'd love to.
Okay.
Sounds great.
I'd be honored to.
Oh, I'm very happy. Thank you so much and see you next week. Bye-bye. Oh, no, see you next time. Bye-bye.